Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Wild and Live. We are back after a little break. We had a week to chill. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Thanks for coming back. What is Wild and Live? Well, it's a show that tells you, or brings lots of cool animal facts with the help of some awesome guests, conservationists, biologists, and filmmakers from across the world. And today we have an awesome guest lined up for you. Roxy Furman, are you wild and live?
Am indeed. Thank you so much
Yes,
for
thank you
having
so
me on
much
here
for
today.
thanks for joining the show. It's great to have you on. Lots of highs and hellos and excitement for the fact that we're back with Wild and Live, and because we got you as well. Before we get started with you, Roxy, just a reminder for everybody at home that's watching: if you have any questions for Roxy, please make sure you pop them into the chat box. I'll be able to see that, and then I can tell or I can ask Roxy your questions on your behalf. And if you are new to the channel, please of course make sure you smash the subscribe button and become part of this growing community. I'm going to have lots more videos coming to you guys over the next couple of weeks and months. So Roxy, thank you so much for joining us. It's
Yes.
great to have you here. We're going to be talking about African painted wolves. I've got a couple of questions for you, but I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball because I feel like African painted wolves, they kind of remind me of hyenas. Do people get them mixed up a lot of the time, or is
Yes.
that just me?
So often when I was doing my research, because my actual experimental side of the research was done on the pack at Yorkshire Wildlife Park,
Mm.
and pretty much every single day I'd have a kid coming up to me and ask me questions saying, "Are those hyenas?" No, they're not hyenas. They just look very similar. And because they're such an unknown species and a species that often isn't covered,
Mm.
I think people struggle to make the association of what they actually are, and then hyenas kind of the easiest guess based
Yeah,
on what they look like.
yeah, for sure. They do kind of look like hyenas, maybe in the fact that they've in their coloration,
Mm.
their hair and their fur. But then you gave me a really great fact about one of their closest living relatives.
Yes, the
What's
African civet.
so hang on a second. We're talking about African painted wolves, which are also known as African painted dogs or African hunting dogs or African wild dogs. So how is their closest living relative neither a wolf, neither a dog, but a civet? How does that work?
Basically, they're neither a wolf nor a dog. They're the
Mm,
only living member of their genus. But in terms of how they look, how they behave, they're a member of the canid family. So it's, easy for us to associate them and their characteristics with wolves and dogs.
yeah.
But genetically, they're not closely related to them anymore at all. They diverged millions of years ago. Um,
I,
so
get-
yeah,
I,
new analysis has shown that they're completely unrelated.
yeah, I think that's the thing. That's why I love biology so much because what you see can give you clues as to what a certain animal is going to be like, how it behaves, but also it might be a bit of a yeah, it might require some more investigation, DNA analysis, and all that jazz. So, thanks for that fact. I love it. But let's get started with my questions that I've got all lined up here for you. So, are you ready, Roxy?
I'm ready.
Great.
I've just prepped
So,
for these.
so here's probably, I suppose, one of the most obvious questions that many people might want to ask. Why are African painted wolves called painted wolves? Um, and why do you
Yes.
also refer to them as painted wolves and not as African hunting dogs?
I mean, that's a good question. Considering they're neither wolf nor dog, it's weird that the change of name went in that direction.
Mm,
But in terms of conservation, as a species, African hunting dogs or Cape hunting dogs have been persecuted for centuries based on their hunting techniques.
mm,
They're extremely successful hunters, which we'll touch on later, and they don't do it in the nicest of ways. Um, so they were perceived to be this kind of evil species that were targeted specifically for that reason. So by changing their name, the painted wolf aspect, it makes them sound more lovable, more intriguing. And in terms of conservation, these lovable species are ones that are often helped more. Um, and aside from anything else, their painted coat is something that's really important for them as a pack. They are extremely social animals, which we'll go into a bit later with their hunting. But their coat is actually like our fingertips. And not only
Interesting.
does that help us as humans ID them, but also within the pack, they can pick up on individuals from over 100 meters away just based on their coat.
Mm.
Um, so it
That's
kind of ties in more to their lifestyle and social dynamics as well.
Yeah, I love the coloration of their hair, of their coat, which it's like brown or like rusty red, black. It's got white spots on it. Um,
Mhm.
the cutest thing for me is are the pups. I've seen them with
Yeah.
they look like they've got little white socks on.
They do. And the pups actually start off quite dark. They look really angry looking. And then it takes about 2.5 years for their coat to fully develop, which is why the pups look kind of different, but just they are so cute. They look more hyena-like, I think, because they have that more angry, like grumpy face than the
Yeah.
adults do.
I know exactly what you mean. I and just to kind of rewind actually, whilst we're on the topic of their names and why they're called African painted wolves, um, I get the sense that it reminds me of the fact that killer whales aren't necessarily referred to as killer whales as much as they used to be. The people tend to call them orcas, and is that the same thing with painted wolves, having
Yeah.
a different name so that people don't see them as just these ruthless predators and hunters.
I mean, that was kind of the reason for changing their names, their common name,
Mm,
because they are a species that have been so massively understudied. Like, if you go onto Web of Science or any of these scientific databases and type in Lycaon pictus, which is their Latin name, you get a few hundred search results. Where if you type in Panthera leo for lions, you get like thousands and thousands of pages.
yeah.
And switching their name like that, like you said, with killer whales and orcas, can just really help people to connect to them more emotionally.
Mm. So Roxy, painted wolves. Where can we find them in the world? I mean, I suppose there's a clue in the name, African painted wolves, but what countries can we find them in?
Yeah, so they used to be found like throughout the whole of Africa, but over the last 100 years, they have massively reduced. They've declined by over 90%,
Hmm.
and they're now restricted to just 39 separate subpopulations throughout Africa.
Wow.
Mainly in southern and eastern Africa now, in places like Kenya, Tanzania, Zimbabwe.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, as I mentioned, this massive decline, there's now thought to be fewer than 6,000 individuals left in the wild,
yeah.
kind of correlated with habitat loss, which is obviously something that's impacting many species, but
Mm.
also snaring, which
What
is
was
a
that last
massive
one? Sorry.
issue.
Also
Snaring.
snaring. Right. Okay. So it's not just it's a combination of the habitat, but also the fact that they're being caught in these snares. And sorry to interrupt you there. Are those snares because people are trying to catch the hunting dogs, the painted wolves, or are they why are those snares being used
I mean,
for?
the snares are just kind of non-selective. They're basically a metal loop of wire that's left out, and any animal that goes through it is going to tighten up and get stuck. So poachers leave them out. They're more to target antelope, but they're known to get lions, the painted dogs, because of the height they are.
Yeah.
They're all walking through that same height.
Mm. Let's talk about their ears. That's one of the
Yes.
things again that stands out for me when you look at um, African painted wolves. They have these massive kind of they
Dobby
look
ears.
yeah, they look kind of comical. Do they what do they use those massive ears for?
Well, they do have an amazing sense of hearing, and they have loads of different vocal communications.
Mm,
That's kind of like a big part of their pack dynamics. They actually, originally, when they studied the hunting dogs, didn't think they had any form of hierarchy because they're very rarely aggressive between pack members. They're actually very like overly submissive, and they'll greet each other with these little yapping calls and like go down on their hunches, and all of these vocalizations, they use them for hunting as well. So it helps them to pick up on those, almost like capturing more sounds with that bigger surface area.
mm.
But also, they are quite fast runners and they have really good endurance as well. And it helps them to keep cool.
Oh, nice.
And
Kind of like
yeah,
elephant ears.
yeah, like
Thermoregulation.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant! Nice. I like the fact that they also have the ability to swivel those big ears. They kind of like satellite dishes sat on the top of their heads, and they have the
They do.
ability to just like swivel them like independently, which is really cool. But you'll
Mhm.
say it all comes down to communication, and we'll get onto that in a bit because that's pretty much why you were studying them, why you were working with them. I got a couple of questions for you beforehand though.
Okay.
How fast can these hunting dogs run? You were talking about the fact that they hunt in packs. So when they're chasing their prey, what speeds are we talking about?
They can go up to top speed of 72 kilometers per hour,
Hmm.
which is pretty decent, and they can go at that for a long time as well. They're not like a lion, which can go in a short burst and then it's done.
Yeah.
They can keep going, so they have really good stamina as well as being able to run fast.
And so you said what, 70 kilometers an hour?
Yeah, top
So
speed.
that's something around 50
Run.
miles an hour, 45, 50 miles an hour, I think,
Yeah.
if I've done my maths correct. Which is pretty fast. That's much faster than I can run, that's for sure. Um, but given the fact that they can run at that speed, around 50 miles an hour, it's interesting because I was looking into this and they have a hunting success rate of about 80%. But when
Mhm.
we compare that to an animal like a cheetah, which can run at up to 70 miles an hour, so it can run much faster than African painted wolves, but only has a hunting success rate of 50%. What is it about the African painted wolves that gives them that edge that allows their hunting success rate, that efficiency to be much higher than a cheetah, an animal which we all know is a brilliant predator?
Yeah, as you say, they are extremely successful. They're known to be one of the most successful predators on the planet, not just in Africa. And that's been attributed to their social dynamics. Some papers have even said, they take sociality to an extreme. Like it's so ingrained in everything that they do, their whole existence depends on these pack bonds. And when they hunt cooperatively. So basically, what they'll do is they'll start chasing prey as a group once they've locked onto, say, a group of zebra that they want to target. And then one of the fit, young, healthy individuals will sneak round to the front of those zebras whilst the others are still running behind. And this one at the front will then let out a loud yelp, which again goes to those vocal communications, basically saying, I'm here, I'm ready, let's do this. And then the others start nipping at the zebra's bum, chasing it towards the one at the front. So then the one at the front can get it, and then they will take it down as a pack and basically disembowel it within minutes, which is why it seemed to be such, a horrible way of killing things. But if they didn't do that, they're competing with much larger predators like lions, leopards, and if they don't take down that prey in seconds, someone else is just going to come and steal it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does seem cruel. It's not very nice to watch, but there's a reason behind it.
For sure. I suppose if you're going to dispatch your prey, it's better to do it quickly. In the case of the wild dogs, like you say, they're trying to make sure they get their fair share of food before a bigger predator comes onto the scene. Part of their success rate, Roxy, comes down to the fact that they're really good at raising the next generation. That is part of how they become successful as a pack. Litters can be made up of up to 20 pups in some cases. Does that get a bit complicated as to which adults look after which pups and which babies get fed first? How does that work? You were talking about hierarchy, so how does that all kind of come together?
Yeah, so within a pack, like you said, they can be massive. Some packs have been documented up to 60 individuals in a pack, although that's getting smaller now that packs are getting smaller. So the average litter size is about 10 pups, but as you said, can be up to 20. But basically, it's only the alphas that will breed and produce young. So there's like the alphas and the subordinates. The alphas get to have pups and the subordinates basically help. It's called alloparental care, basically like babysitting, where they feed mum, they feed those pups, and they actually don't breed themselves. There have been some cases where subordinates have bred before, but 9 times out of 10, the alpha will then either kill those pups or restrict access from other subordinates helping to feed those pups, because resources are a limited things. And if you have, an average litter of 16 pups, that's greater than any other canid, any other dog species. So they need all the hands on deck to help raise those pups, or they're not going to survive.
Yeah, for sure. I've got more questions for you. I can hear your doorbell going though.
It is.
Has someone got that, or do you need to get it? Because I can.
Do you mind if I run?
Let's do that. This is welcome everybody to
back.
live TV. I'm going to switch to my camera whilst Roxy heads down. This is live TV, people. But it's great to have Roxy on, and I'm glad that everybody at home is watching. Remember, if you do have questions, please pop them into the chat box for myself and Roxy. Roxy is back. Here she is. Let's pop you up on the screen here. There you are. Awesome. Brilliant. Thanks for. So we were talking about alloparenting and sharing the basically adults sharing the load when it comes to looking after the young. We have the alphas, the alpha male and alpha female that have babies. A kind of startling fact that I read was the fact that 50% of pups are killed in their first year. So, with that stat, it kind of brings. I suppose they need round the clock care. So how do the adults balance that need of going out to hunt for food whilst also protecting the young? How do they work that out?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird dynamic in African painted dogs, because they are so social. They actually really care about the others. If there's an injured member of the pack, they won't leave it. They'll feed them. If there's an old member of the pack, they won't leave it. They'll feed them. In most ways things work, parents, like in lions, the dad would eat first and then the kids are given the leftovers. But here, the pups are the ones that are really nourished and looked after. So mum actually stays in the den with them for the first 8 to 10 weeks. And they help feed mum during that time. And then after that time, when mum can start coming out, they all start helping to feed the babies. So yeah, they do have a seemingly low success rate in number of pups raised to adulthood, but compared to some other species, it's actually not that bad. And that alloparental care does play a massive role in that, and it's something we see not just in painted dogs, but meerkats and many species of birds, and it is known to be a really successful strategy for kind of improving the numbers that do survive to adulthood in the harsh world that we have out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we see it in elephants too. We do it as humans. It's basically babysitting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Getting your aunt or uncle, your older brother or older sister to look after you whilst the rest of the pack is then free to go and hunt for the next meal. They are pretty messy eaters. Have you seen hunting dogs, these painted wolves, feeding their young before, Roxy?
Yes.
Can you tell us what happens?
Well, I haven't seen it down a burrow, but once the pups come out about 3 months old, they'll start actually joining hunts or waiting near the den and bring food scraps back to them. And it's bloody, it's gory, it's smelly.
They are super. We were talking about this earlier, the fact that they are super smelly. So we got these creatures which you seem to love, which are messy eaters. I know that when the parents come back to the den, they will regurgitate food for these young pups. Going back to what you were saying earlier about the fact they've got to disembowel this prey and eat it really quickly, come back to the den, and then this like sick comes onto the floor, and these pups all join in, and they are super smelly. So why are these animals smelly? Is that used for anything? Is that used for communication?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of why they're so smelly, there isn't like again, because I said how understudied they are, no one really knows, but it's thought that it helps them stay together as a pack because their sense of smell is one of their strongest senses. I think they can smell each other, might get the 2.5 miles away, something crazy like that. They can smell one another. So it's thought that it kind of helps them stay together as a pack and know where one another are without constantly having to turn to figure it out.
I'd love for everybody to find out a little bit more about what it was like for you to study these animals. You were at the Shamwari Private Game Reserve in South Africa. Can you tell us a bit about what you were doing and what you discovered?
Yes. So at Shamwari, I was there initially to look at the landscape of fear, which is basically the science community's fancy term for predator-prey relationships. Um, Often when you go to these game reserves, you think you're seeing animals completely in the wild, which you are sort of, but they are managed populations of animals. You're visiting these preserves and they are trying to make sure that there are the big five on the reserve and rare populations of antelope are still being able to breed and recover their numbers. So they often have areas with altered predator densities where in some reserves they actually have no predators present.
Right.
So what I was initially looking at was whether they were aware about whether predators were present when feeding at watering holes and whether that altered their behavior. Um, and that basically involved looking at poo for a few weeks.
There we go.
Picking
Would-
up poo,
you wouldn't
IDing it.
you wouldn't be a real biologist if you didn't have a story about poo. It seems that a recurring theme. Um,
Yeah.
but of course, it's a great way of being able to study animals. It's a great non-invasive technique. So you're looking at the landscape of fear, trying to figure out if the painted wolves reacted differently depending on whether there are other predators in that area. Is that correct?
Yeah, whether their prey reacted differently. So, round a watering hole is, a very dangerous time for a prey species because that's such an easy target for them when their heads are down at the watering hole. They're not aware of what's going on. So, the hypothesis was that in areas where predators were present, prey would spend much less time at the watering hole and they'd spend more time kind of in the vegetation around it. And when they were aware that predators weren't there, they wouldn't care. They could just chill by the watering hole freely, knowing, well, I'm not going to get eaten, so I can just chill and have a drink. So that's kind of why we're looking at poo, because it was basically indicative of where they were foraging, where they were spending more time, and what species were spending the most time around those areas as well.
Yeah, and I understand you also looking into how the pack communicates and learns not only from their environment but from one another as well. So what are the things that affect the way that those that the painted wolves learn, for example?
Yeah, so that was for my then final dissertation project that I did in final year. And I was actually supposed to be working with wolves, actual wolves, for that study, but that fell through. And I was like, I don't want to do something on zebra finches or whatever my supervisor suggested. So I picked up a ex-master student's project about the African painted dogs, um, basically looking at social learning within a captive pack. This study was carried out because it was, I think, Thorndike who did the puzzle box experiments with cats and rats and stuff years ago that
Puzzle
probably would
box.
never happen anymore. But he basically showed the effect of, an observer watching a demonstrator who had already learnt a task, being able to solve that more easily. And then the kind of next step of that was people realizing some animals watch others and then they keep that. It's not just retained in that moment to solve that task, but it's then passed down through their generation. And that's kind of how cultures form, because we often think, culture is something limited to humans, but you see it with different chimp populations, with different humpback populations. It's something that's, within all different species. And kind of then went from that to go on to, well, do these highly social species that are known to be one of the most social animals on the planet learn socially from one another? And if they do, can we use that to improve their conservation success and help bring those numbers back up to their former glory?
Interesting. So what kind of tasks do these hunting dogs are they able to learn from other members of the pack. Do you have any examples of anything specific that we can?
Yeah, so one of the tasks was a rope task. It was basically set with a tiny bit of rope hanging into the enclosure, and out of the enclosure was a big bit of meat tied on. So they'd have to pull the rope all the way through to be able to get that bit of meat. And it was really interesting because the alphas, the leaders of the pack, would be the first to approach the task, showing, reduced fear of new objects. But it was actually the subordinates or the lower ranking individuals that would be the first to solve it. And that's seen in other species as well, that innovation is more common in these lower ranking individuals because they have less access to resources. So they do need to be able to solve problems quicker to get those few seconds before another one comes along to have that food or have that water. So yeah, and we also found that it kind of spreads based on who they rested with the most. So who they had those strongest social bonds with, they'd be more likely to learn from as well. And there's been, I think, 6 or 8 translocations of captive bred painted dogs back into the wild. And so far, none of them have been successful. The same as moving a pack from one area to another in the wild has a really low success rate as well. And they think that's because of these highly social dynamics, and there's this critical phase of learning where they're not learning the anti-predator behaviors they need to know, or the other skills that they typically learn from being with that one individual. It's like with an elephant, the matriarchy. If a herd loses their matriarch, they might not know where the water source is.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've got 2 questions for you, Roxy. Some really good ones, actually. Let's start with Janine Kavanagh, who asks, what causes the death of 50% of pups? What are some of the dangers that a young pup might face? I'm assuming
Disease
potential predators.
Is a big thing. Yeah, potential predators is more of a natural cause. So lions, hyenas, crocodiles. Any of you who saw Dynasty probably saw one of the pups captured by a croc on there. But also, humans and animals are living much closer now than they did before. And a lot of us have domestic dogs. And because of this close DNA between them, things like canine distemper virus can spread to these wild dogs. And that's causing massive mortality, specifically in the pups as well.
Our second question comes from Moving Pictures Africa, who, and it's a good question because we've called these animals so many different things, and it's because they have so many different names. Okay, so here's a question: what is the correct name? Painted dog, painted wolf, or wild dog? and did the prey behave differently when there were no predators were in the area? I think you answered that question already. So I call them African hunting dogs. But Roxy, you prefer to call them
painted wolves.
And who's correct? You
but
or
there's
I,
no
or
right answer.
None of us.
None of us are right. They need a new name altogether.
So they do have a number of different names. You can call them African hunting dogs. You can call them African wild dogs, African painted wolves, African painted dogs. They do have a lot of names, and I suppose that's. They are really beautiful animals, and their coloration is quite spectacular. Roxy, as we kind of come to a close, I want to ask you, what is it about African hunting dogs? Yeah, I'm changing my name already. Changing names already. What is it about African hunting dogs, African painted wolves that you find most enchanting and fascinating, and why do you think that they deserve our attention?
For me, there was this really human element from studying them and seeing how they interacted. Humans as a society, we really take care and look after our elderly, our sick, our young ones. And in the rest of the animal kingdom, if you are old, sick, young, you're normally left behind. Whereas in African painted dogs, because they're so social, they have those bonds, they really care and really nurture those relationships. And I think that can be something that could really improve their conservation efforts, bringing that kind of emotional side into it. Drawing those links in our mind between humans and other animals often helps us understand and want to help them more. So that for me was why I was really kind of endeared to them and really wanted to learn more about them and see what I could do to try and help make a difference for their conservation.
Yeah, well, that sounds brilliant. We are almost out of time, Roxy. But before we do go, I'd love to share with everybody what's next for you. For anybody that doesn't follow Roxy already, there's a link down in the description. Check out her Instagram. I do not have your TikTok. She is a dancer. She likes to dance and acro yoga.
So do you.
I do like to dance. And also, you're also vegan. I've tried that before. I'm not. I'm almost there. So what's next for Roxy in terms of what you're doing? And I understand that you have a business on the side as well. So tell us all about that.
Yeah, so that was actually set up the final year of my undergrad as well, which was a bit of a crazy decision at the time. But I guess the more I was learning at uni and realizing our lives currently aren't living in a way which goes with conservation and supports conservation, things we do in our everyday life can really make a difference. I feel like conservationist as a word often has a lot of stigma attached to it, and it's like you have to be a scientist to be a conservationist, but I don't agree with that at all. I think conservationist is literally just about doing things which helps animals, and that could be if you're a lawyer getting involved with animal rights, or if you're a painter painting things about animals. So my business is kind of based on our everyday lives, things that we can do to just make simple swaps. So I have like bamboo toothbrushes, yoga mats made from recycled cord. Everything's just like plastic free, palm oil free, just really simple, easy things that we can change to basically live in a way which has less of an impact.
And what's the name of the company?
It's called Zephyr Eco Market.
And can you tell us why you called it that name? I know why you called it that because I've never heard of the word Zephyr before. What does that mean?
Yeah. So Zephyr is a mild, pleasant breeze that travels through the environment, causing minimal disturbance. And I believe that kind of reflects how we should live our lives, not, like a hurricane bulldozing everything we come across, but just gently. It's going to feel our presence, but making that as small as possible.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. I think on that note, that's a brilliant way to round up. Roxy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been brilliant. Lots of great reactions from all our viewers. So that's awesome. If you want to find out more about what Roxy's up to, head down to take a look at the description. There are links to her YouTube channel, to Twitter, and also to Instagram. And also
thank
to
you so much.
Yeah,
thank
brilliant.
you for having me on here.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope lockdown or the end of lockdown is treating you well. And let's keep in touch. It'd be great to have a chat with you again sometime soon.
Amazing. Thank you.
Nice one. Thanks, Roxy.
Bye.
That was Roxy Furman, everybody, aka Roxy the Zoologist, or is it Roxy the Biologist? I can't remember. My mind is playing tricks on me. But thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. It's great to be back and have you guys here. We have a whole week of guests lined up. So we usually go out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but this week we are going out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Take a look at the video list. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. we're going to be talking to Billy Heaney, wildlife presenter. It's going to be great. Make sure you tune in 11 a.m. I will see you there. Make sure you have your questions ready. It's gonna be awesome. Thanks, guys. Take care, and I'll see you later.